Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and today I'm going to be talking about Gepard and teaching you how to build him and how to play him as well. He's one of the strongest characters right now in version 1.0. So much sustain, so much shielding that he offers, and also crowd control. But first, let's go and take a look at his kit in action and before we actually elaborate on other stuff of his build. Okay, the first thing to know about Gepard is he has naturally an aggro drawing in one of his talents, and his passive ability is once he dies one time per battle, he actually can revive. This is a lot of the reasons. A lot of people say it's useless and not very useful, but I find it's very effective, especially when you have a lot of debuffs on the particular character. Sometimes it's better that he faints and then revives, so he basically self-cleanses all the additional like burn DOT debuffs on him as well before you heal him up later on. When he revives, he also gets a bit of his energy back based on certain multipliers that he has as well. But of course, if you have a little bit more, he also gets his full energy, which means if he faints, it's an immediate restore for him. But generally, he's quite chunky. He's most well known for his ultimate ability, which applies a very strong shield to the entire team. So let me just cast it real quick. I'm just going to normal attack. Normal attack, there's no enhanced mode. So I'm just going to smack it, get my energy, and show you what the ultimate looks like. So as you can see, the ultimate ability is quite a chunky shield. My Gepard is not like super well built because I built a lot of other characters on my account, already like 1k plus. Now let's take a look at his other abilities as well. The second thing that makes Gepard extremely strong is his ability to crowd control in his skill ability. So let's just read the description of what it does real quick. As you can see here in terms of the skill, he deals ice damage to a particular target and also has a chance of freezing them as well. I think here's like a 65% base chance without Eidolons, and with Eidolons it increases slightly as well, but 65 is pretty good. It's like March 7's ultimate ability once you unlock her major trace. So let's go and take a look and freeze this monster and see how it works. Hopefully it succeeds. So that is the main gist about Gepard's kit. Now let's go into the screen and talk a bit more about his major traces and other stuff. So other than, for example, the skill and ultimate ability that we saw and his talent that we briefly touched on, when he enters the battle, he actually has an enhancement technique that starts off a shield that applies to all allies. This is very useful because it starts off the memory of chaos, for example, with a shield, and it's a technique that is an enhancement and not an attack, meaning you can stack like multiple enhancement on other characters that you have as well. I find it pretty useful. Overall, good value. And the other thing about Gepard in terms of his major traces that is very strong is this major trace here, Commander. When he faints, he immediately gets it back 100%, which means if let's say the enemy has a devastating AoE attack, he faints, he gets his ultimate, you can immediately cast the ultimate for a big chunky shield. I find it quite useful. A lot of people I see on the internet are not saying that it's very good, his revive ability, but one thing to know is this is also indirectly a self-cleanse, and that is quite useful because if you are stacking a lot of debuffs, like as I mentioned, you will faint once, you come back, you get rid of all those debuffs too. Other than that, he has a natural aggro draw in his kit, which is quite significant, especially since you have the option of running different Lightcones. He doesn't have a guaranteed taunt in his kit, and he also has a little bit of conversion in terms of attack damage to defense damage. For me, in terms of priority of traces, as you can see, I'm just focusing mainly on the defensive ones. I focus on the ultimate ability, his talent a little bit more here as well to get a bit more revive up. But other than that, as you can see, he's very low investment. If you're not building him for damage, which in the early to mid game probably he's not going to be fully built, later on you can build a little bit more damage as he converts a little bit more of these defensive stats to offense. But for now, for the main part, when you're lacking resources, I think it's fine going for more defensive stat. Doesn't even need too much investment in his overall kit. You want to get his ultimate up a little bit, get his defense stats up so that this scales a lot better. Some of you can get like 2k, 3k quite easily with a well invested in terms of his ultimate chunking up very quickly. So on that note, I think what combos well with this increased higher attack means that his light cone options are very flexible. Now let me go into the light cone screen real quick so you can see all of it at one glance. For the Lightcone screen that we have here, because of his natural aggro draw, he actually has quite a number of options to run. Personally, I think a lot of you might be asking, is Day 1 better or is Londell's Choice better? I use, actually, to be honest, in the Memory of Chaos, I use both of them equally as much, depending on the situation. Day 1 of my new life is very good if you are expecting your team to be taking a lot of AoE damage. So he has an AoE team-wide shield that's very thick, adding this damage reduction for the whole team is beneficial for him already. So I think this is pretty strong in that circumstance. If you, for example, are looking for more redirect aggro to Gepard only, or maybe you don't have a healer in that team composition, you could play him in the corner together with Landau's Choice to increase the amount of aggro that he's drawing. One important thing to know is that Gepard doesn't have damage reduction in his natural kit, which means that he will be taking quite a bit of damage naturally as the game goes by, and if you don't have a healer sustain him, you will find that he is always at very, very low life most of the time. I think Landau's Choice does get rid of a lot of this. It increases the chance of you hitting him, which bypasses the need for taunting by and large. Of course, a lot of you see the Tingyun memes that they always aim Tingyun. That's an exception, but having more aggro draw directed at your tank is of course good value, because a tank is supposed to draw aggro, and if it's not drawing aggro, it's not doing its job more so. At level 1, in terms of super imposition 1, you also have a pretty nice 16% damage ignore, which is already double what day 1 of my new life is, and this damage reduction does add up. You can stack it on with, for example, other relics we'll talk about in a little bit. Out of all the other Lightcones, I think one other one that I use regularly that is a free-to-play option is Defense. Defense is super strong if you don't have a healer, because at max super imposition 5, most of us will have it if we are doing enough pulls, because it's a 3-star Lightcone only. 30% is very significant. He does use his ultimate quite a bit, as he always gets hit. He does his skill, for example, to freeze, does get a very good amount of uptime in terms of his overall kit. So I think Defense is pretty strong. Other than that, now I don't really like We Are Wildfire that much. It has a 5-turn limit, unless perhaps you are really super under level and can clear it confidently in a couple of turns. I don't find it very, very strong. A good free-to-play option maybe if you don't have these other options as well, if you really have no choice. Still decent, but note that as after 5 turns is basically a stat stick. Trend of Universal Market, on the other hand, is really, I think that it will shine later on when more DOT teams come about. This gives him a bit of versatility if you want to put him with Kafka, Sampo, for example. I think it will be interesting to see what this does. It does a lot more conversion also based on target's defense. Can be interesting. We will wait for 1.2 and beyond when Kafka comes around to revisit that. And I think what a lot of you might be interested in is probably like the other ones, which is this one from the shop, the Star Glitter shop. Of course, you can convert 600 of the premium glitter into this moment of victory. What this does is it increases defense, which he likes, is his main stat. It converts to attack as well because of his major trace. Effect hit rate is good. It allows him to freeze more often as well, because that is basically his primary role. He always freezes in the Memory of Chaos, as long as he has enough hit rate as well. Increases the wearer's chance to be attacked, so increase aggro draw, which is Landau's Choice basically, and when the wearer's attack, increases their defense a further 24%. So a very solid stat stick as well, combined together the fact that it also has 5-star stat scaling. I think this is probably his best in slot, especially if you don't care too much about AoE team-wide damage, where day 1 of my new life offers. Increase aggro draw, good amounts of stats as well, increase effect hit rate. Other than that, I think this is me, a Battle Pass Lightcone. This one increases his ultimate ability damage from the ultimate, which doesn't apply to Gepard. He doesn't do damage. So if you are pulling this, you only want it, for example, from the defense main stat, which you can really find like in a lot of places. For example, day 1 of my new life has it as well. And last but not least, in terms of texture of memories, this is the one from the Herta shop. Effect Rest is nice to have if you find yourself, for example, we are entering in the later part of the game where a lot of the monsters has crowd control, effect hit rate that is much higher. This could see some value, especially when we can get it at max level 5. And other than that, when he's hit, has no shield, gains a shield. If he has a shield, has damage reduction. Most of the time he has damage reduction in build. I think this is pretty useful also, especially if you maybe play March 7 together with Gepard and you redirect the aggro to Gepard, so you don't really need like Landau's Choice or his signature Lightcone here. So it's not useless. I think it's pretty useful, especially with 5-star stat scaling, and it's free in time to come. Probably not the most urgent out of the 3, but if it's free and it's usable, I think it's still pretty good. And next up, optimal relics. We have Guard of Wuthering Snow. I think is probably his best in slot. There are 2 options. I think you can go with Knight of Purity Palace and Guard of Wuthering Snow. Let me explain why I prefer Guard of Wuthering Snow a bit more. He already has quite a lot of shielding, so you don't really care too much about the additional 20% shield, unless your team is really suffering from a lot of damage. Both of them, in my opinion, are honestly inter-exchangeable, because this 20% is very significant, especially in a chunky shield that he has. 2k shield without this additional is quite significant significant. It does add up over time, good defense stat as well. But why I like Guard of Wuthering Snow better, a little bit more, is he doesn't have damage reduction in his kit, so a 2-piece of 8% damage reduction is super solid, and at the 4-piece over here, when the turn starts, he also heals some HP, especially when he's below 50%, and gives him even more energy. What this 4-piece basically does is, if he's soaking a lot of damage, and he has already no damage reduction in his kit, if you're not running a healer, this gives him a little bit more self-sustain, and also more energy to have uptime on his ultimate. Super good in terms of, if you're thinking about it in the early game, you don't have many healers built, maybe you only have Natasha, or perhaps your healers are not super well built, you're lacking resources. I think Guard of Wuthering Snow is very, very attractive. But really, both of these probably are okay as well. And if you want to run him a little bit more damage, you could of course run maybe a 2-piece combo. You could run maybe a 2-piece defense, 2-piece Guard of Wuthering Snow. I think it's pretty fine as well, especially if you don't have that much resources to like min-max a particular character. Especially defensive characters, you don't really need to min-max that early on into your game. Probably you want to focus on your DPS characters. Other than that, I think ice damage 2-piece is probably good. He probably won't use the 4-piece, so you can run like a 2-piece ice damage and 2-piece damage reduction if you want to run him more of like an aggressive damage dealer. I think those are some options that you can go with. Other than that, for Planar Spears, I think there are a few options, and this is where it gets a little bit more versatile. You could run many options. You could run Bellerbog of the Architects with 2-piece. He has a very nice 15% which he uses. Increases more defense when he has higher effect hit rate. He does want to build a little bit effect hit rate if he's finding that he's not able to land his freezers very often, because his freezing is very, very solid in his overall kit. By freezing the enemy means you're taking less damage, so building him for effect hit rate is not a bad option to go for, which is in line together with Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise. I think this is also a pretty good set on him. Giving him more hit rate means his freeze chance is higher. As you know, his skill is only a 65% base chance, and it's not guaranteed. Having more effect hit rate increases the chance of him hitting his freeze. Very, very solid as well. Other than that, I think Fleet of the Ageless is possibly a decent option. Giving him more HP indirectly benefits him as a tank, although it doesn't increase his shielding because it scales with defense, but more HP means he's also able to soak more damage, so it's not a useless stat. And when his speed is slightly higher, his attack increases by 8%. Quite easy to achieve this 120, especially with like some substats, maybe a speed boot if you wanted to give like him attack bonus to the entire team as well. Other options that I think that he could run will be, for example, Sprightly Von Wack. It's just a very nice 5% energy regeneration rate. And this action advances at the start of the turn, so good if you really urgently need a freeze, but I wouldn't think it's much to rely on. Mostly it's this 5% energy regeneration rate. As for main stats and my Gepard, I don't have him super well built. He probably will be one of my middle investment characters. I do use him very often, and he, as you can see, he's used often, but he doesn't have super high investment. I'm running personally 2-piece Bellerbog of Architects and a 4-piece Guard of Wuthering Snow. I mentioned why in the earlier section. Let's take a look at his main stats of the pieces that I'm using. I'm mainly running a defense percentage body. I'm running a speed boot, and really I choose speed over defense because if he acts more, he also acts as a controller. He's able to freeze enemy units. By moving more often, he's also able to, for example, generate more skill points for the team by normal attacking. So he has the flexibility of attacking or freezing enemies. Gives me a bit more flexibility as well. More turns means more energy, means more uptime on the shielding for my entire team, and being less reliant, for example, on speed buffing characters like Esther. Having a thicker shield matters to me less than having that shield uptime even more. And I think speed does mitigate a lot of this, and it allows him the flexibility of freezing, so acting as a control unit too. As for Bellerbog of Architects, Planar Sphere, I'm running defense. Ice damage, a lot of people might be thinking about it. I think right now defense is much more efficient. Probably would switch to ice if he's becoming more of a controller or DPS, a sub DPS, especially with his final major trace that converts more defense to attack. But for now, I think defense would likely work pretty well. And of course, for the link rope, I chose to run energy regeneration rate. I think a lot of you might also be thinking about other stuff as well. I chose energy regeneration rate because I want more uptime on his ultimate ability. I don't mind sacrificing a bit of defensive stat, especially since my body as well as my spear are already defense, so I have good amounts of stats there. Energy regeneration is a little bit harder to get, so I do want a bit more uptime on his ultimate ability. Alternatives I think that I didn't mention is you can go for effect hit rate body if you wanted to. I think effect hit rate body will come in more handy later on in the game whenever you're watching this video as well if you're building Gepard. Right now in 1.0, enemies have pretty low effect resistance, so that having defense is much more efficient in the early game, especially when you're taking a lot of damage. You want his shield to be a little bit more thick, but later on in the game when your characters are much more independent, or maybe there are more healers in the game, you don't rely on him that much, you could run him as an effect hit rate controller type unit, especially if you have him at Eidolon 1, which is I think one of his best Eidolons here, because it increases the base chance to freeze enemies by 35%, and I think this plus the base is like 100% base chance to hit freeze with his skill. So that's one of the things. And since we're already conveniently on this screen, let's talk a bit about his other Eidolons. Lingering Cold here, when an enemy is frozen, their speed is reduced. I think his Eidolons does let him become a lot of a controller rather than a pure specific preservation type unit, which gives him a lot of longevity, because later as we go into the game, we want more offensive coming out of our defensive supports rather than like pure tanks, because as content gets harder, we need more DPS to meet requirements. I think his Eidolons scale pretty well. And of course, Fate moves mountains. When Gepard is in battle, he increases allies effect rest by 20%. Super solid because you gain additional stats for the rest of the entire team as well. And let's look at the last one, E6, which a lot of us might not be able to get very easily, but nice to still see. When his talent is triggered, when he revives, not only does he get his full entire shield, but he also immediately gets to act, which means that you can immediately proc a freeze, and he also restores additional HP. This is, I think, a full heal with a max level as well, if I'm not wrong. So a full heal, you immediately act, as well as you also have your ultimate ability ready. So 2 turns straight away, shield up, and even freezing the enemy, especially with base chance 100% to freeze. Very solid E6. But of course, it's an E6, not accessible by most people. That's why I left it in the middle of this video. Not going to talk much on that. Okay, team comms for Gepard. I've already done like a full video in terms of all permutations and combinations on the channel. It's like best teams for Gepard. You can click on it if you're interested. But a very quick section here, I think what Gepard really wants, especially in the early game if you don't lack resources, you might want to run a double healer if you, for example, have the surplus. But if you don't want to run a double healer, I think a character that you could pair is like March 7, put Gepard in the corner, put March 7 shield on him. He will get a lot more shielding, a lot more aggro drawing, allowing you to not run Landor's Choice if you don't want to, and you can run, for example, Day 1 of My New Life for team-wide damage reduction. Or you could run them a Landor's Choice to increase the chance of aggro being drawn to him, damage reduction for him, making him a lot more tanky as well. And in the other 2 slots, I think that you could probably run a Han class character. Maybe you can run Dan Heng here for a single target damage. Of course, you can run any other character, a Han character, to do a good amount of burst damage. Yanqing, I think, will probably benefit a lot from his stick shield. He doesn't like to take damage at all, and the aggro that he offers is very beneficial for Yanqing as well. I think he's probably the best in slot defender unit for Yanqing. Super solid as well. An AoE character, you could of course run Jingyuan in the last slot here. Does like to drink a bit of skill points as well, because he doesn't really benefit too much for his normal attack. Or you could of course run another AoE character. Maybe you want to run, well, you could run Himiko. Any other AoE characters work as well. But maybe just to end off this video, I'll talk about one last one. I think you could consider running a character, for example, like Ireland here. Ireland doesn't like to be healed. He gains more damage at lower life. He really dishes out quite a lot of damage when he's at lower life as well. And Gepard's stick shield does complement his playstyle quite significantly. And yeah, if you found this video helpful, do like and subscribe for more of such future content. I'll leave you with these 2 other videos I think that you might be interested in, and see you in the next video.